happy to introduce Linda Merigliano, who is the Recreation Program Manager on the Jackson Ranger District on the Bridger-Teton National Forest. And again, she's going to speak to us about the wonderful world of visitor use management. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Linda. Thank you.
Okie doke. Well, welcome everyone. And I'm very happy to, this is my favorite topic in things. And so looking forward to the discussion and see where we go with this. So anyways, the plan for today is to just go through some real basics. I know probably people are coming into this with a variety of different levels of experience, but go through some basics about how we approach visitor use kind of issues. And then I will provide some examples of what we've done. And the idea is that these kinds of concepts can be used in a variety of settings, whether you're working in wilderness, whether you're working in kind of front country dispersed recreation areas, or in wild and scenic rivers and things, is trail systems. The concepts are really applicable across those different kinds of settings, winter kind of activities and things. But I will say that to start off is that I'll use the term visitor use and recreation use interchangeably. Some agencies prefer visitor use, some prefer recreation. So those two are pretty synonymous and things. And just for a little bit of background, I am the Recreation and Wilderness Program Manager for actually both Jackson and Black Rock Ranger districts on the Bridger-Teton. I've been working in the greater Yellowstone area my entire career. And I did start out as a seasonal. I was a backcountry wilderness ranger for about 11 years and really got into visitor use management and planning because I was sick of seeing and addressing the same problems year after year and wanted to try to work towards more long-term solutions. So that's how I got into this. And I suspect that probably you can relate to that if you're working in the field. But I will say that visitor use management is a huge topic. There's a lot of complexity with this, and we're just going to be able to scratch the surface in this presentation. But again, throughout this track of the session, there'll be folks that can speak to more and more specific case studies and things. So I do want to emphasize that I think we're in a way better place than we were many, many years ago, is that there's lots of tools and resources that are available to help with and guide these kinds of issues. There's no question you're not alone in doing this. Everyone is addressing visitor use kind of issues in some format, and lots of great experience being developed around the country. So it's definitely worth reaching out and gleaning ideas from others. And then I just really hope that, at least with our short time together today, that this will generate at least one idea that can help you with a particular issue in the place that you're working to protect. So, ultimately our goal is we're trying to connect people to the outdoors and to public lands. We've heard for years people really want access, but at the same time, this access must be well managed. And particularly right now, these outdoor spaces are more important than ever. And that has become widely recognized. So it's a good time to be working in visitor use management. With that, though, I don't want to underestimate that this is dealing with these kinds of topics can be really challenging. We've all seen the headlines, and And there's a wide variety of issues that we're dealing with the natural resources issues, social kind of conflicts. And then in addition to that, one that's getting increasing attention is just the strain on those of us that are working with the public and trying to address that, the management capacity and staffing that is needed to deal with a variety of issues. So it is a challenging area. It really requires, at least what I've found over the years, requires someone who really has a passion for that place and can communicate that they really do care about that place. It does require good information on what's happening and how things are changing. It requires a lot of relationship building and a ton of communication and things. And so those kinds of skills really need, and that's what makes it really fun, is you're working with a huge diversity of public interests and trying to figure out a process that everybody feels is fair and transparent and something that is actually going to make a difference on the ground. So some of the trends that we're seeing, and I don't think any of these are going to be news to folks. The pandemic definitely brought a new urgency to this topic. It's not, some of the negatives is there's more people, and very clearly a lot of folks that are coming to the outdoor spaces now don't have that much experience. And so what that means is that we need to kind of refocus on some of the basics and welcoming them into these spaces, but providing the information so that they can be successful and learn the knowledge and skills that's necessary to be a responsible visitor. We're seeing more resource and social impacts. The new technologies are definitely creating challenges for all of us. A little less workforce capacity, though with the national recreation hiring surge, hopefully we can start to make a dent in that. And then also just less trust in some of the traditional institutions or traditional ways we've done some things. And I think that opens up a huge opportunity for being a little more creative and not engaging with people in the same way that we always have in the past. But the positives, and I don't want to underestimate, these are huge positives. Outdoor experiences are incredibly valued now. More people want to help in some way. There is increased public land support and more support for management action, which we honestly haven't seen in a lot of years. In some areas that, with the tragic fires and floods, there may be an opportunity to kind of start fresh and you've got a bit of a blank slate of how do we rethink this area or reimagine this area. And then also there's some new funding sources that are coming online that we can take advantage of. So I do want to emphasize that it's not just the increasing number of people, but there's just changes in how people are who's coming, what they want to do, how they get their information. So it's that combination of evolving use, not just more use. So, these are the common impacts that we tend to deal with in visitor use management. And, just looking at, I'll go through, these are just some really common ones, is an increase in search and rescues and people getting in trouble or getting injured and needing to respond, putting strain on search and rescue organizations. We're seeing a lot more concern about interactions between wildlife and people, not just from a negative encounter or a conflict kind of interactions, but also disturbance kinds of effects. Seeing lots of impacts associated with vegetation loss, soil erosion along rivers, or proliferation of grading of trails, stream bank kind of conditions here that are illustrated at the bottom. Definitely seeing a lot of issues around parking, and particularly at trailheads and boat ramps and things like that, where there's only one trail, but there's a pretty limited amount of space for parking. Social conflicts, and then over here, much more concern about the increase in invasive plants, invasive aquatics, damage to cultural resource sites, and just the unavoidable effects of human waste that are associated with the increasing number of people. So what I'd like you to do is, at the top of your screen, you'll find, if you pull down the toolbar at the top, you'll find a little button that says annotate. If you click on that button, you'll see a thing that says stamp. And if you hit that and select the check mark, I'd like you to put a check mark next to the kind of impact that you see that you're most concerned about. Just pick one of these that you're most concerned about in your area. Okay, we have some check marks popping up around the vegetation kinds of effects. Certainly the congestion at trailheads and in particular locations, that's a biggie. Human waste, lots more attention on that. All right. It's interesting to see a lot of the human waste. We don't usually see that one popping up quite as much, but it's certainly one that we're dealing with. I'll talk a little bit about. So great. That is appreciate people doing that. And okay, so a few principles that I think are good to review before we dive into the framework, and all recreation causes impact. For a long time we were dealing with this myth that recreation was totally a white hat kind of activity, and there were very few effects. The difficulty is that recreation use, the kinds of effects tend to be cumulative. So you don't see them as much from just one person, but the overall amount of use in a particular and concentrated in particular locations, you start to see these very definite cumulative effects. Thanks. And then another thing that is clear is change is inevitable. When we do a lot of public meetings, a lot of times we hear that people just want things to stay the way they are. And that really isn't realistic. Is things are gonna change. We need to be proactive in trying to guide that change. And another principle that we've used in addressing these issues is that not all areas should have the same emphasis. And this goes back to early work that was done with the recreation opportunity spectrum, and having a diversity of opportunities really gives people more choices. And the reality is also that different places have different ecological sensitivities, and every use can't be accommodated all in the same place on every acre. We have to make some choices about what kind of experience, what kind of opportunity do we want to provide in this place versus another place. And then, be proactive. Change is hard, takes time, and we've got to discuss the trade-offs and make some choices. One of the clear principles is that it's very difficult to change the use patterns once they become established. And so the more that you can be proactive and address things. And I know a common thing that I hear from a lot of our folks is we should have done this 10 years ago. Yep, we probably should have, but there's no time like now. It's not going to get better on its own. So at least if we can intervene now, we can probably make at least some difference. So another principle that is worth talking about is that we hear the word visitor capacity a lot, and it's an important concept and things, but it shouldn't be used as a shorthand when what we really mean is that we need to do good visitor use management. So there's been a tendency to just say we need to do a visitor capacity, but that is way too confining, because you're just then dealing with the numbers, and our concerns are not just about the number of people, they're also about location of use, behavior of users, and behavior of visitors and things. So capacity is really a subset of visitor use management. And so we need to try to erase that language and start using the language of we need to do good visitor use management here. So what do we mean by visitor use management? And this is the definition that has been developed by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, which consists of all 6 federal agencies, Forest Service, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and then also NOAA that manages a lot of marine sanctuaries, and the Bureau of Reclamation that manages a ton of recreation use. So it's all 6 agencies agreeing on a common kind of terminology and a common approach, which is pretty cool. So this definition, there's some highlighted thing here, is that visitor use management is proactive, it's adaptive, and that it's a process for managing characteristics of visitor use and the natural and managerial setting, using a variety of strategies to achieve desired conditions and visitor experiences. And so we're going to be coming back to particularly characteristics of visitor use and desired conditions. But that's the definition that's being used by all the agencies now. So within that, there are 3 really fundamental pieces that are necessary for good visitor use management. And the first is you've got to know what you're trying to achieve. Is what does success look like? What is that desired condition? And we tend to be really good as humans of saying what the problems are and what we don't want. We're not as good about thinking about what do we want to achieve? What does success look like? And it's just a harder task, but one that is really key to making progress here. There also needs to be an understanding of how visitor use influences desired conditions, of what are those kind of causal links. And we'll be talking more about that. What's the real issue? And then third is a commitment to active management and monitoring and things. In every case, something can be done, and there just needs to be some kind of action and feedback loop to say, are we making a difference? So let's dive into what are these characteristics of visitor use that we're talking about. And these come from decades of research studies that have been done on the effects of what determines the amount of impact in an area. And there really are 5 factors, and these are the 5 factors that we can influence through our management. So obviously the amount of use is one factor. The timing of use is another factor. And we see this is, we know that particularly with wildlife effects, the effect of recreation on wildlife is much, much more pronounced in the winter season when animals are struggling to find forage and things. Also, another example is the impact on trails is much more significant in the spring when soils are really wet and they're just melting out than when they're drier later on. The location or distribution of use. If a trail is poorly located and not built in a sustainable design, then even a low amount of use can result in erosion and non-functional trail. Distribution of use is the number of people. Is it just a problem in specific hotspots, or is it really the overall amount of use that is the issue? The type of use definitely plays a role, although I would say that a lot of the research that's being done now, there's been a zillion studies looking at the type of use and the effects of that type of use, and lots of mixed results. And so one of the things that we're learning is the type of use may not be as important as some of these other factors. And then lastly, the behavior of visitors. And again, you can have a small group of people that can create a lot of impact versus a larger number of people that are behaving responsibly and don't have much of an impact. But through the work that's been done with Leave No Trace and things, there's kind of 5 categories of undesirable behaviors that they've categorized, and how you deal with these is a little different. Is it careless behavior? Is it unskilled? Is it just that people aren't prepared or they're not informed? Is it an unavoidable kind of impact, or is it an illegal? And so, understanding, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of our folks being fairly new to outdoor spaces, they may just not be informed or may be unskilled. And so the way that you deal with that is different than like human waste is an unavoidable kind of impact. And so you just got to figure out, okay, how do we deal with that? Everybody's going to do it. So how do we deal with that? And then obviously, if it's truly, wanton illegal use, then that's a different kind of a response. So really understanding that is what's those causal links is critical. So again, I'd like you to use that annotation tool and think about the impact that you were concerned about, and put a X mark next to the causal link that you think is most related to your impact. Okay, great. That is the three that you're pointing out is what we're seeing in most of the issues we're dealing with. The amount of use, particularly in, like in particular congestion in a parking lot or trailheads, and just the sheer number that are going in on a particular trail, location. The location of where use is occurring just isn't in very sustainable locations, and then tons of stuff around behavior. Those are definitely causal links that keep coming up. So thanks for that. Okay, so what is this framework? Is we try to approach these issues with 4 different key elements. And I want to emphasize in this is that it does not have to be a long drawn out planning process. You can use this in a variety of scales, but it's really important to just be asking the questions and walking through these different elements. So we're going to go through each of these and what those questions are. I do want to emphasize that this is not a new framework. It really is just a refinement of what we've learned over the past 30 or 40 years in working with these issues, and definitely drawing from what was learned during using the limits of acceptable change system, and in the Park Service, the VERP system, and then also a lot of work that if we're going to make progress, we need to be thinking a little more strategically and at a little bigger scale. Sometimes if we try to solve a problem in one particular location, we just move it to another spot rather than really thinking about what we want to achieve overall. So the visitor use management framework is an evolution in drawing from the lessons learned from all of these previous efforts. So the first element, build the foundation. And this is one that I've found that people sometimes skip over, and it really does kind of set you up for success if you can think through this. Is again, what is the problem or opportunity that we have at hand? Why do we need to do something? What's the evidence? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we have not been particularly good at really doing good problem analysis. And so, oftentimes you just hear people say, well, there's just too many people. Okay, there's too many people. What is the effect of those too many people? What is the actual effect that we're concerned about, and why is that happening? Is it happening at what scale? And so we really need to kind of peel back and understand that problem well. Is there direction that already exists? Is it just really an implementation issue, or is it truly that we lack the direction for how to deal with this particular problem? And then what's the project scope? And this one is, typically what I found is that there's a whole variety of issues that are out there, and it seems really overwhelming. And, we want to take it all on, but there's no way that we have the capacity to address all the issues. So trying to kind of say, okay, what's the most important thing to take on now? And then we can build on that in the future. And that's illustrated a little bit by this planning triangle here, is that, you know, we're limited by the amount of time that we have to try to respond to something, the funding and staff that we have available. And so one of the things that we have control over is what's the project scope? You know, what are we really going to take on? And refine that to something that is actually doable, and then build on that in the future. And then lastly, given that project scope and things, how much investment is needed? And what we've included in the framework is what we're calling the sliding scale of analysis, where you can work through these 4 factors of what is the scientific uncertainty around the particular issue? What's the impact risk? How interested are people in this particular issue and level of controversy? And so making sure that we use that, say, how much do we need to involve all of our specialists? How much do we need to build a lot of public support, maybe before we even go out with a proposal for NEPA and things? And so that level of investment really needs to be commensurate with the consequence of the decision. If we're making a decision that's going to reduce the amount of use that's occurring in an area, that's a big deal. And so we're going to have a little bit more investment upfront in building the case for making that change, versus if we're going to just modify the location of, maybe it's the location of a trailhead. There might be a lot of public interest in that, but there's still going to be access and everything. There's not going to be probably as much concern about that, versus something where we're saying that we're going to ban a particular kind of use, or we're going to limit the amount of use. So again, in understanding this problem, it really is worth spending the time in a small group, with, if you can, in an interdisciplinary kind of fashion, is, what is the specific issue? What's the scale? Why is it an issue? What is that specific link? If it's a behavior issue, do we know what's driving why people are making the choices that they're making, and really understand the problem? And that's gonna, if you do this well, the solutions tend to be then much clearer. There's a strong tendency for people to want to jump to the solution before they've really defined the problem. And so that's the thing that we're trying to change here, is spend the time to clearly define what the problem is and why it's a problem. Because one of the things that has been clear is that people don't believe that there's a problem we're solving, no solution is really going to be acceptable. And in doing this, this is an opportunity to really use storytelling, communication. Why should people care? What's at stake here? So here's an example of one that we've been dealing with. And again, this is from a dispersed camping kind of example, but the same kind of thought process could be used. We've used it in wilderness, in dealing with wilderness issues, as well as some river issues and things like that. So again, I just have this is the most recent example of stuff that I've been dealing with. But, we started seeing a big increase in use in about 2016 on the Bridger-Teton, the north end of the Bridger-Teton. Lots of campsite proliferation, people driving off roads to get to little high knolls for camping, escaped campfires, food storage issues, human waste, lots of conflicts and safety issues. That's illustrated by this photo on the bottom. We were seeing, big rave parties of 150 people, people getting really drunk and then trying to drive down our forest roads, and some horrible accidents, and just some clear safety issues. And then also, we're seeing a huge increase in grizzly bear activity and right around a lot of these campsites. So we did a number of listening workshops and just trying to see if people felt like they were seeing the same issues that we were seeing. And so kind of that validation thing, what were they concerned about with what was going on in these areas? And out of that, we originally wanted to take on the camping issue. We wanted to take on some trail issues and some road issues, and kind of OHV travel management issues. And based on those listening sessions, it was like, well, we can't take on all of that. And so we decided to defer the trail issues and some of the OHV stuff and just focus on the camping issues, because that seemed to be what was most intimate things. So then the next element of the framework is define visitor use management direction. What are we trying to achieve? What does success look like? And how do we know if we're going to make progress? What metrics will we use? And again, this can be a kind of a fun exercise, but it really does take some interdisciplinary discussion of, what does success look like with this? And, some examples is when we're dealing with congressionally designated areas, we have the law and the enabling legislation to tie to is for wilderness. We know that we have to preserve wilderness character, but what does that mean? What are those fundamental things that we're trying to protect for wilderness character in the particular wilderness that we're managing? The same way with the Wild and Scenic River is, what are those outstandingly remarkable values that are important to protect on that particular river? And so being clear of what is important in those areas, that makes it distinctive and valuable. And even if we don't have a congressional area, one of the things that advocate is that many national forests have developed some kind of vision or some kind of recreation niche that is, what is their identity? Not every single national forest is the same. Not every BLM area is the same. In the Park Service, there's a lot of work that is around what are the significant interpretive themes. And that information can be used to draw on, what is important about this area and the values that we're trying to protect. And so for the camping example, we tiered again to this overall vision, but when we talked about it as a little team for the camping example, we wanted to confine the expansion of campsite impacts. We wanted to reduce the potential for escaped campfires, improve food storage, and particularly our metric is we cannot have habituated bears that have to be removed from the population. We want to reduce human waste, and we want to improve the safety and quality of the visitor experience. And so we try to, with stories and everything and working with our folks in the field, is we keep going back to we're going to be successful if we don't have an escape campfire. We're going to be successful if a bear doesn't injure a person or has to be removed. And we're going to be successful if another big metric that we're using is we'll be successful if at the end of the season, people feel like they made a difference and they're willing to return. And that's that capacity thing, that they aren't just totally burned out and they feel like they were supported. So we're doing this in larger contexts too, and it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process. We held an interdisciplinary meeting and spent, I think, 6 hours really talking through for the whole front country area interface around Jackson Hole, what were we trying to achieve? And ultimately came up that we're trying to just hold the line in terms of the current extent of impact with some flexibility to make changes within the existing disturbance envelopes. And ultimately with that goal of preserving what makes the Bridger-Teton unique in terms of wildlife, watersheds, and wildlands, which, you know, echoes back to this vision. And so we're trying to build some stories around reiterating that story as we're working with the public. So it's just an example of how, and I know there's lots of others out there that what could be done. So then you turn to element 3 is identify the management strategies and actions, and you know, what actions could be implemented to improve the conditions now that you know clearly what the problem is, what you're trying to achieve, and things. And typically, you know, this is the work that we're more familiar with, but making progress typically requires a package of actions. It isn't just one thing. And then talking about the trade-offs, one that we're discussing right now is, you know, do we repair a road that has become significantly deteriorated, or do we move the trailhead and basically abandon the road and rehab the whole thing? And things. So we can make those choices. So going back to the camping example, what we ended up doing in 2018 was going to a designated site system for dispersed camping. And so it's enforced via the motor vehicle use map, but you can only camp where you can park your vehicle at these marked spurs. We selected just 5 areas. It's not the entire district. The decision talked about what were the criteria for selecting what was going to be these designated sites. And then we built in a bunch of monitoring and an adaptation, knowing that we weren't going to get it all right the first time and things. And so these are the kinds of, you know, basic management strategies that we can use. We can modify the type of use that's allowed. We can modify visitor behavior. We can try to change people's expectations of, one of the things that we're trying to work on that is that of really hammering home this myth that it's dispersed recreation or dispersed camping. You should be able to just go anywhere you want. And it's like, no, if you're coming and you want to be right near Grand Teton National Park, you're going to have to plan ahead and make some arrangements and not expect that you're going to find a site just anywhere. And so really working on modifying that expectation. Again, modifying the timing of use, the location of use. We can increase the ability of sites to handle use through hardening and different kinds of tactics there, and modify the spatial distribution of use, again, by selecting, with the camping example, selecting particular places, or we can try to reduce use or increase the supply. Example of maybe we increase the capacity of our existing campgrounds to relieve some of the pressure on the dispersed areas, or increase the trails that we're offering. But again, there's some trade-offs with all of those. You know, do we concentrate use? Do we try to disperse use? Concentrating use tends to provide more habitat security for critters. And so it's a good strategy if you're trying to deal with wildlife issues. But you tend to end up with a little bit more social conflict. And so how are you going to deal with that? With the human waste example, you know, do we put in infrastructure or do we require people to pack it out? And with all of these, again, with all these management strategies, we keep going back to that there's the three E's is that what can we do with design and basically the infrastructure, how we design trailheads, how we design facilities. You know, lots and lots of work going on right now around how do we make shuttle systems effective for dealing with parking and reducing the number of people that need to drive to different trailheads. So lots of work going on in that arena with transportation studies. Education is a key part of it because, again, a lot of the issues we're dealing with are behavior related. So education is a really key part of it. And then, of course, follow up with enforcement where necessary and things. And I'm going to emphasize here that especially because so many folks are fairly new, is that there is a ton of really creative work happening around responsible recreation and really getting people on board, including media outlets, the whole outdoor industry, involving lots of partners. And it's the business community, it's the travel and tourism, Chamber of Commerce's and things, is building those relationships and engaging a lot of partners so that we get this recreate responsibly message out to everyone who's coming to the public lands. And in doing that, it's there's actually a fourth bullet here I missed, is what is the message? How are we saying it? So how do we say it so that it's a positive message, that it connects to the particular target audience? Who is the messenger that can best convey that message? And then also another one is, when do we say it? Is I think we've all know the examples of people come to the trailhead and the trailhead sign says that you need a permit, that you can only get back in town. That's the wrong location to be delivering that message. So, you know, what do we say? What do we say before people arrive? How do they intersect with messages when they arrive in the town? And they might be visiting the brew pub, they might be visiting the coffee shops, they might be visiting the outdoor store to pick up something. And then what do they see when they're on site and things. So really thinking through what messages we're delivering at each of those different kind of touch points. And I think that lots of people now are realizing that, and again, this is drawing on that there's more and more people that want to help. And these places mean a tremendous amount to people, and they do want to care for them. And so the idea of ambassadors has really taken off. And there is nothing more effective than that personal touch in the field by someone who is welcoming, but is helping people do the right thing. And so this takes lots of forms of camping ambassadors, trail ambassadors, summit stewards. This is from the Adirondacks, winter ambassadors, river ambassadors, and things. So it really has proven to be incredibly effective. But again, it takes work. You've got a lot of training. You've got to make sure that people are supported and feel like their work and effort is valued. Thanks. So here I was just thinking that it would be helpful if you could either raise your hand and offer an action that you've implemented that you think has improved a situation, or throw something in chat just so that everyone that is on the call can see, the variety of ideas that are out there.
So I work with the Bureau of Land Management in Basin and Range National Monument. So I'm in kind of like southeast Nevada, and we have a number of cultural sites, some that are reasonably popular because we're only about 2.5 hours from Las Vegas, and one of our sites was experiencing some impacts from people camping right next to the petroglyphs, right up next to it. And so our response, and this has actually been a long time coming, but the response was, do we put up signs? Do we do X, Y, Z? I mean, what do we do? And we decided that rather than do that, we would build some little primitive campgrounds about 1/2 mile away in an area that was not near anything, and try to concentrate and promote and persuade people to use that area. So we put a vault. We're going to put a vault toilet. We're in the final stages right now. So there'll be a vault toilet and a few primitive campsites there. And so people will pass right by that on their way in to see the sites. And that's hopefully what will draw people to stay there, because they'll have access to all that infrastructure.
Great. I mean, that's a perfect example of if you're dealing with something like that through engineering and good design, is trying to provide an alternative for people and direct them to a place that you want them to go, and then discourage the use where you don't want them to go. But they still are able to experience these places. So that's a great example, Michael. Thank you for sharing that.
Morgan Somerville shared in the chat that what they did was get Linda to help them start an Appalachian Trail Visitor Use Management Program. Good one.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. You guys are doing great work out there. Okay, well, again, as we go on, if you've got other ideas and things, it'll help there's almost 50 folks on the call. If you've got some ideas, it just is oftentimes helpful for other participants to see what you're doing.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, Linda, but there's a few other things.
Oh, okay. And I'm hoping that everybody can see the chat to see those ideas. Any particular that you would like to call out, Jimmy?
No, I just wanted to make sure if you wanted some more examples, there definitely, there's 2 or 3 that have been added to the chat, but
okay.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone can see those, so feel free to move on.
Okay. Yeah, trailhead ambassadors. I see a lot of stuff with, again, like Michael talked about, of trying to encourage use in one spot and discourage use in another spot. Again, those design, the design solutions of making a site that is more inviting, that has the feel that you want people to experience about the place, and things can really help encourage people to do the right thing. It's we talk about the broken window effect of if a place looks like it's trashed and the signs are faded and ripped up and the place just doesn't look like it's cared for much, there's more of a tendency for people to trash it further and things. The more it looks like it's being cared for, just right there, that sometimes can encourage more responsible behavior. And lots of, I'm seeing stuff here about, partner organizations. And I can't echo that enough, is the partner organizations are able to do some much more creative things with, particularly with social media, than we can within the agency. So, developing those relationships with one of the things that we're trying to do now, we haven't implemented it yet, but working on it, is all the places that sell bear spray, is having posters right at that place where the bear spray is being sold of, you're in grizzly country. Here's what you need to do to be safe and ensure that the bears can survive. Same way with all the places where there are trowels and the outdoor stores of little toilet systems and things like that. Having the information right in those places about how do you deal with human waste. And we have a number of partners that are working on some creative kind of fun messaging around that. So again, with people want to help, and there's people with a lot of life experiences that can bring a great vibe to a particular place and help and really take ownership and make a difference. And they get a lot of reward out of that and things. So anyways, that's like kind of the last element is implement the actions. One of the mantras that we have here is, what's the plan and who's in charge? And so we keep going through that. Is, when everything feels like chaos, you go back to, okay, what's the plan? Who's in charge? And talk through, what do we need to do in the next week or the next 2 weeks to deal with whatever issue has emerged. And some examples of that, of doing the monitoring and collecting the information to have the stories of what is actually happening because of these different management practices that have been put in place, but then also the data behind that to show from a quantitative standpoint what's happening. And so this upper picture here, there's such cool applications now with technology to be able to show those changes visually on a map-based kind of application or via dashboards to be able to analyze information really quickly. This is a University of Wyoming graduate student who's doing her thesis work on evaluating the effectiveness of ambassadors and what difference they're making in terms of responsible recreation. And so, that's something that we oftentimes don't really take the time to do the evaluation. So again, working with different partners. And then, just doing field AAR, after action reviews at the end of every season with the key staff and the people that are in the field to hear the stories about, what was a highlight for you? What was successful? What suggestions do you have that we need to improve on the next year? And just keep, again, adapting, celebrating success and adapting and making improvements from year to year. So in the end, success, I've always tried to measure success by, it's not necessarily perfection, but we're just striving for progress. moving the needle forward, even if it seems like it's just a small step. If you get some of the momentum going, it can build on itself. And you never know where that's really going to lead, but I've seen a lot of good things happen just by getting something going. And then having explicit rationale for why you made the choices that you did and be able to explain that. And most people, if you can explain the why of why you made the decision and the choice, they'll accept that. And then success, if there isn't a commitment to move forward, then the planning was kind of for naught. Is really need to do that follow through and have some commitment to implement things and to follow through. It's not just a one and done kind of action. And ultimately, over time, is allowing that process of that continual adaptation, listening, and making improvements over time really does build a lot of trust and credibility, and builds the social capital that allows you to, more and more people want to jump on board and help. At least that's what we've found. So, just some lessons that we've learned over the years is this work fundamentally is all about people and the relationships that you build. When we started talking with the Travel and Tourism Board, and a lot of kind of animosity about, well, they're just promoting more visitation, but engaged in those kinds of conversations, like, no, they were recognizing that they needed to do more with managing expectations and talking about how people use these areas sustainably. And over time, that has yielded some pretty cool things, and a real partnership. Again, sell the problem, not the solution. Communicate early and often, enlist partner help. And what we found is even if people disagree about, what kind of access things, most people really love that place. And so if you can kind of go back, we all care about this place. We've got to figure out how together we care for it and things. And so I think that that's partly why a lot of the responsible recreation stuff is it's pretty hard to disagree with. We all need to be responsible, and build that kind of community of practice that this is just how we do things to take care of a really special place. Again, change is hard. It isn't going to come overnight, but if you keep working at it, you can make a difference. Define what success looks like and commit to some kind of action to just move the needle forward. And again, like I said in the beginning, there's no better time. There's a lot of opportunity because people have the experience of the pandemic. They've seen some of the changes and they want to help. And so it's a really good time to be doing this kind of work right now. So with that, I'll just open it up to any questions that folks might have. And I know that there can be a lot of frustration because the problems do seem like, where do I start? Where do I do? What can I do? And I think at the field level of, being able to, document what's happening and be able to tell that story. There's lots of creative things that folks on the ground have produced little videos or produced podcasts, and then just start connecting with people that might also be concerned, and see if you can start to build some momentum. Pictures pictures and stories really do make a difference.
Morgan Somerville had a comment in the chat box worth sharing. I'd like to emphasize the planning at the beginning in our Appalachian Trail visitor use management planning where we've had issues.
Okay, yeah.
It was because we didn't set a timeline and adhere carefully to the first few steps in the process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think I tried to emphasize is that build the foundation element. People tend to skip over that one. And I've seen that derail a number of efforts. So again, doesn't need to be complicated, but pay attention to each of those elements.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name is Locken Wood. I work for the Bureau of Land Management out of Wyoming. And
Oh.
I have a question about if you've had any experiences where like you thought you were managing to a certain sort of goal or outcome, but then through like with new users who might be younger or just new to the outdoors, or they're from different environments, you're finding that like the tolerances for certain things that like a manager might have a low tolerance for lots of fire rings or crowdedness or like uses that we might have thought were conflicting, but like new users have a different perspective or like a different tolerance for some of that. And just curious if you have any examples of that or what you did with it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things that, you know, has come up in a lot of the conversations of, you know, if we, especially for those of us that have been working in this field for a long time, is what we thought might been unacceptable impact in the 80s. People may not feel that way. Now we may be creating unintended barriers. And so part of that is really trying to understand is, you know, what is the issue, and how far are we willing to take this? I truly believe that it doesn't, at some level, you know, nobody wants to see human waste everywhere. No one wants to see, you know, the first, and this is where human waste has been a pretty powerful one for motivating action, is when, you know, the first part of the trail just smells like pee the whole time that you're on it. And I've seen some river corridors like that too. That is not an experience that, I mean, people start reacting to that. And so one of the experiences that we had, you know, again, the human waste was the big motivating factor for some of these general recreation areas where people were saying, I mean, I can't believe that this is happening. And it was a very visible, visceral thing for folks. And so our partner group worked with Campendium, which is one of the big apps for dispersed camping, and started talking about, you know, we at least need one vault toilet in one of these concentrated use areas, and we were able to raise, our partner organization raised $60,000 in less than a week for a vault toilet. And so it was completely funded and maintained by the partner group. And people really rallied around preventing human waste and things. So we didn't think that that funding toilets would be so popular, but that is one thing that we've seen is again, but it takes a kind of a core least a kind of a critical mass of people that are like, this is a really special place. And it doesn't have to be a congressionally designated area. It might have been something that people visited with their families for generations. And, there's a lot of stories or history behind that. And it's special for a community or the particular traditions that were in that area, and start to kind of get those stories and build a coalition of people that are also concerned about what's happening and the changes. But as you said, we need to also be open that what our idea of what's acceptable or not acceptable may not be how the larger community feels, and just need to be open to hearing that. And we're public servants, and see if is it really an issue for where it's degrading water quality, or is it just our own perceptions? Who's it a problem for? So that was a little rambling, but that helps a bit.
Hey, Linda, we have a couple minutes left. We have one more raised hand. Mike.
Well, kind of in the same vein as what Linda was just talking about, what do we do when we've got a non-conforming improvement that the users love, but which the law says we're not supposed to have there? In this case, it's a constructed hot tub in a wild and scenic river in a wilderness.
Yeah. Those are tough issues. There's no question about that. There's endless stories about cabins and things in wilderness and in wild and scenic and things. And so I think again, if that is a non-conforming use that really needs to go away, that's recognizing that change is to try to cram that down people's throats. They're probably not going to accept it. And so you're going to have to invest more in building a coalition around that. And so, the question is there natural hot springs? What could be done that would be more fitting with the natural character of that area, and what are the options there? I think that one of the things, kind of responding to the last question, is running through. Let's brainstorm here some scenarios. If we don't deal with this, what is this area likely to look like 10 years from now? We know hot springs are a natural attraction point. Is that what we really want for this area? How do we, given that this is a natural, people probably have some affinity for the overall natural setting of that place, is there ways that we could make that spot more compatible with the values that have been identified for that river corridor, using natural materials or something? So I don't know, those are just initial thought.
Hey, thanks, Linda. We're about we're out of time, and so I want to say thank you for presenting, for joining us today. Thanks to the group for the questions and answers.